wow. Ma'arbet.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem is right. All right. Here we go, Chavre. Good morning, everybody. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM Daf Nun Tes. We started at the end of Nun Ches Amud Beis Abraisa, elaborating the Seder of the Avodah of Erev Pesach. At the end of the day, as we do every day, the generally final carbon is the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, followed by the Pesach. And the Braisa said, and that's followed by the Ketores, by the afternoon Ketores, and that's followed by the kindling of the Neiros. However, we're going to learn today on Daf Nun Tes a dissenting Tanoic view regarding that Seder. In other words, whether the Ketores and the Neiros is indeed going to be at the end, or whether we're going to put them prior to, as we will see. Another very interesting related topic, all about Kachim. There are certain people that are called Mechuser Kippurim. Mechuser Kippurim are people that, in as much as they underwent whatever they needed to do to become purified, and they have their Tara, and they went to the mikvah, and it's already the night, but a Zav, a Zava, a Metzoida, a Yeledis, they also need at the end to bring a carbon or karban nois on their 8th day. Until they bring that carbon, they are called mechuser, they're lacking their atonement, and they may not eat kachim. Now, what happens if there's a mechuser kippurim that the 8th day is the 14th? Now, if they would bring the carbon, shalom al Yisrael, they bring the carbon, the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, they can bring the Pesach and they'll be able to eat it. What happens if their kapara carbon was not brought before the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, which normally should be the last carbon? So when a mechuser kippurim, his 8th day is on Erev Pesach, as we will see. Of course, ideally the carbon should be brought before the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, but if it was not brought, then he will bring the kapara carbon after the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim. Should have been brought before the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim. It can be after the fact to bring it afterwards, in order for him to be able to participate with the carbon Pesach. No one debates that. Question will be during the rest of the year. Let's say a mechuser kippurim also wanted to bring a carbon shlamim, and the kohen already shechted his carbon shlamim, and they just realized that they did not bring the kippurim carbon yet, and the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim was brought. Can you bring the kippurim carbon even after the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, which will then allow him to eat the shlamim? Now, even though a shlamim can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night, but so what? But ideally, he should be allowed to eat it for both of the 2 days, or not. Or the rule that, like we learned, Allah hashlim kol karbanis kulam, aside of the exception of a carbon Pesach and related to carbon Pesach, no more exceptions. That will be another machlekes we're going to have today. We're going to learn various rules regarding kachim. For example, there's something called psulina, that if something is overnighted, once it becomes imbued with kedusha saguf, generally it becomes invalidated. However, an exception will be that if something is on the top of the mizbeach, by it simply being there, it will not become invalidated with it being overnighted with a psulina. We're going to learn also about various stages or various levels of kapara, of atonement, that's connected to the various stages of the avodah of the karbanos. When it comes to the avodah of animal karbanos, you have the shchita, then you have the kabbalah, then you have the hoilacha, then you have the zrika, but then you have the burning of the emurim, then you have the achila of the kohanim, and we will see that the achila of the kohanim is that which brings about the complete atonement. Kohanim oichlim, uba'alim ischaprim, and if we'll have time, we'll start the Mishnah on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis, which is so connected to the first Mishnah in Zajac, that introduces the concept of machsheves shaloi lishma by karbanos. Machsheves shaloi lishma by karbanos means that, let's say I have to bring a carbon shlamim, and the owner or the kohen, during any one of the 4 steps that we just mentioned, shchita, kabbalah, hoilacha, and zrika, the kohen thought that this is an oila, and they're doing the avodah l'shem oila. In other words, they did it for the wrong carbon. So the rule generally is that a machsheve sheloi lishma, even though the animal is not going to become invalidated, we continue doing the avodah, but it's not going to be oila liba'olim. It's not going to be credited for the obligation of their owner. So if I have to bring a carbon shlamim and the kohen had a machsheve and a machshava that he's doing any one of these 4 steps for another carbon, it's not going to count as my shlamim. I'll have to bring another shlamim. But the carbon itself is not invalidated. However, like the Mishnah says in the beginning of Zvachim, there are 2 exceptions. And that is Pesach and Chatos. Not only is it not oila leba'alim for their chayva, it actually becomes invalidated. So we're going to start learning details about this machsheva shaloi lishma on the Mishnah on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis and going into the sugya on Daf Samach. So without any further ado, we left off on 3 lines from the top of the Amud. We are mamash in the middle of a brayso. Very important to recap. We learned from the words in a pasuk in Parshas Tzav, Elyahu, that v'hikter Elyahu chelvei hashlamim. So the Gemara darshaned that shlamim doesn't only refer to the specific carbon shlamim, but shlamim is miloshen hashlama. So you bring the woods in the morning. On it you bring the tamid shel shachar, which is the oila. On that you bring Elyahu, you bring all of the other karbanis, Elyahu hashlim kol karbanis kulam, and that excludes that when you finish the avodah of the day by bringing the tamid shel bein harabayim, after that, as a rule, there are no more karbanis. Nevertheless, we learned in the Braisa that the exception will be out of Pesach, that after the tamid shel bein harabayim, then you bring the carbon Pesach. And then the Braisa continued, and then you bring the Ketoides, and then you make the Neiros. The question is, the Braisa on top of the Amid is explaining why is Pesach the exception? Bring the carbon Pesach, and then at the end bring the Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim. So the Braisa says that since regarding carbon Pesach, the Torah doesn't only use the words Bein Harabayim, but there's also a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh that uses the words Ba'arev, like Rashi says, Tizbach Esa Pesach Ba'arev. So the Torah uses the words both Ba'arev and Bein Harabayim. Regarding the Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim, the Torah only uses the words Bein Harabayim. So something in which the Torah uses twice in different expressions of the afternoon, evening, it should be Yu'uchar, it should be delayed, it should come later. 3 lines from the top. Asks the Gemara, if that's the logic, so Ihachi Ketoides V'Neiros Nami, should dafka be before the carbon Pesach, using the same logic, because why don't we say that Ye'uchar Davar Shlema Be'erev Bein Arbayim, that which is the Pesach, on which the Torah uses both the expression Ba'aref and the expression Bein Arbayim, that should be delayed. L'davar Shalinemar Boy Ela Bein Arbayim Bilvad. And like Rashi brings, this is a very important Rashi, 7 lines from the top of the Amid, that at the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, the Torah says, I'm quoting the pasuk, Uba ha'alois aharoin es haneiros bein ha'arbayim. That's a pasuk clearly about the natives. The Torah says the words yaktireno. Yaktireno, as Rashi says, doesn't only refer to the natives. It also refers to the ketoides that's brought in the afternoon. And the pasuk says the words bein ha'arbayim, but we only have Bein Arbayim. There's no word Ba'erev, not on the Ketoides, not on the Neiros. So why isn't Pesach the last step of the day of Erev Pesach? Asks the Gemara. Answers the Gemara, Shani Hassan, that since the Torah uses the words Oisoi, the word Oisoi is written also regarding the Neiros. And now we're going to the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh, as it says in Hebraisa, when it says Mei Erev Ad Boiker, the Torah says really, Yarech Oisoi Aharoin Mi Erev Ad Boiker. The Torah is speaking about Aaron and the Kohanim lighting the menorah. We taka light it Bo'erev, and it burns through the night until the morning. The word Oisoi is superfluous. Oisoi it. We're speaking about lighting the candles. It could have said Yarech Aharoin Mi Erev Ad Boiker. So says the Braisa that the reason why the Torah writes Oisoi, as the Gemara says in Zavachim, we go to the longest night in the year, winter night. How much quantity of oil is needed in order for the neiros to remain kindled throughout the longest winter night, a half a loig. So in other words, every night they would put a half a loig of oil in order to make sure that even if it's the longest night of the year, it will remain one, it will be one burning, me'erev ad boker. And if you remember, we spoke out in Zavachim, what happens in a summer night that's very short. So what did they do? There were actually opinions that said that they made the wicks thicker. Or the quantity of oil was always the same. The menorah was supposed to burn through the night. Now, even though there was the Ner Hamaravi, there's a three-way machloikas. If you remember which Ner is the Ner Hamaravi, and there was a miracle, Bisman Bayis Rishon, perhaps sometimes Bisman Bayis Sheni, that the Ner Hamaravi never burnt out. That was a nes. But normally the oil was in order for the candles to remain burned throughout the night. And again, oisoi is to make sure that you won't have to add oil. And from there we learned the shiur of a half a loig. That's one explanation. And davar acher in the braisa, something else from the oisoi. Ein lecha avoida sheksheda mi erev boker elo zu bilvad. No other daytime avoida is allowed to be undertaken after the menorah is lit. So I get it, it's out of Pesach. And yes, Pesach comes after the afternoon Talmud, because by Pesach it says Erev and Bein Arbaim. But what are you telling me that you should do before the Pesach, the Ketores and the Neiros? No, the Oisai is telling you the Neiros is the end. And how beautiful is that? The last thing we do, my friend, the last things we do in the day is we light a fire that's going to light up our night. That's the last thing. And my tamo again, Omar Kroy Yarach Oisoi Aran me Uban of Erevad Boiker, Oisoi me Erevad Boiker ve'ein Dovar Acher me Erevad Boiker. So since the neiros has to be at the end, which would mean after the Pesach, and the ending, beautiful. The Iskash Ketores Leneiros, which is the Rashi that we learned 7 lines from the top of the Amid, that when it says at the end of the Tzav of the Pasuk that the Aaron should light the candles, yaktireno is linking the ketores and the neiros. So since the neiros is the last, the ketores always is second to last. Prior to which comes the Pesach, prior to which comes the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbaim. So that's the ending of Braisa number 1. Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbaim, Pesach, ketores, neiros. When we learn in the morning, when we should be saying in the morning, Abba, you have a Masada Seder Hamarach, and now you appreciate that Seder, to come to that Seder, oi, did we go through a Gavalda Keyegia to figure out, Taka, watch it proceed what? However, the Gemara says, V'tanya Kikushan, there is a Braisa that disagrees. The second Braisa actually sides with the question that we just asked. The question is that since by the Pesach, the Torah uses the words both Be'erev and Bein Arbaim, that should taka be the last. And indeed, the Seder of the second Braisa is Tamid. Everyone agrees that Pesach, Tamid is not the final carbon. After the Tamid comes, the Ketores. After the Ketores comes, the Neiros. The Ketores precedes the Neiros. And after the Neiros comes the Pesach. Indeed, this Tanach holds, and of Pesach, the last avoid of the day is the offering of the carbon Pesach. And the logic is exactly as we had above on top of the Amit. That your Uchar Davar, that what should be delayed the most, that upon which the Torah says both Ba'erev and Bein Arbaim, that should be the most delayed. So now we have a machlokes tanoim regarding the Seder of Erev Pesach. Asks the Gemara, didn't we just explain the first Braisa, that when the Torah uses the words oisoi it, from it, the Davar Acher, we learn that no avodah may be done after the Neiros. Answers the Gemara, Itaka comes to teach you that which is done inside the Kodesh, inside the Heichel, the final step there has to be the Neiros. What other avodah is done b'fnim? The Ketores. Perfect. It's between the Neiros and the Ketores. Which one comes last? The Neiros. Or my neo Ketores. Because Salkadai Techamino, Hoyluksiv, since the Pasuk writes, Uba ahalois aharanes aneres bein harbaim yaktireno, right? When Aaron will kindle the lamps in the afternoon, he will burn the Ketores. When he'll kindle the lamps, he will burn the Ketores. It's almost mashma like Ketores comes at the end. Amot sounds like Neiros Bereshon, then Nakter Ketores. So that's why the Torah writes the word oisoi No other avodah in the Heichel happens after the Neiros. Ella bein ho'arbayim yaktireno, which again is mashma, that he kindles and then he burns. It's mashma that Ketoides comes at the end. So Hachi Ka'amar, the way you'll have to touch the pasuk is, this is what the merciful one is saying, that Be'idan, in the time, the Madlekes Neiros, when you light the candles, the Ketoides already needs to be burning. Tehei mikatra Ketoides. Bottom line is, we have this big machlokes regarding the Seder of Erev Pesach. Brisa number 2 says, Tamad Shel Beinu Arbayim, Ketoides, Neiros Pesach. And the brisa that we began yesterday, that we concluded today, is that no, that Erev Pesach is Tamid, Pesach, Ketoides, and Neiros. Baruch HaTorah Adonai Eloheinu Malachim Shar Kol Nidor. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan. There is nothing that's offered in the morning before the morning Tamid, Ela Ketoides Bovad, other than the morning Ketoides, which is amazing. Regarding the morning Ketoides, it says Bab Boiker, using the same logic. Why double Bab Boiker? So because of the Torah repeating the word Boiker twice, we say that Yugdam, the Yugdam Ketoides, which is Davar Shalem Bab Boiker, Dichsiv, V'hikted all of Aharim Ketoides Hamam Bab Boiker, that should precede the Davar Shalem Boy, Ela Boiker Echad. And where does the Torah write Boiker Echad? On the morning Tamid. It says Esakeves Echad Tase Baboiker. Period. Weiter says the Brisa ve'ein lechol davar shemis akev achar tamid shel bein arbayim. Elom, there's nothing that is delayed, which means there's nothing that may be brought after the afternoon tamid, other than the Ketoides and the Neiros, which both Brisas agree to that. The machlokes that we began today, no one is saying that the Ketoides and the Neiros should happen before the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim. The only question was Pesach versus Neiros and Ketoides, which one comes first? But regarding if you're looking at, if the reference is the afternoon Tamid, the Ketoides comes after it, the Neiros comes after it, Pesach comes after it. No one debates that, and now we're introducing something new, which is Umechuser Kippurim, but only Be'erev Pesach. So again, the Zav, the Metzoida, and the Yoledes, people that even after they undergo a procedure of 7 days of Tara, and they went to the mikvah on the 7th day, and yes, that there's a concept of Tful Yom, but when there's head of Shemesh, right, they can already eat Truma. If Hashem is demanding of them that they should bring a carbon on the next day, so then they may not eat any other Psar Kachim until they bring their kapara. And by the way, Midrabanan, after they bring their final carbon, they have to go to the mikvah again. Even though Midoiraisa, normally the mikvah of the Mechusar Kippurim will be on the 7th day. Okay, now think about Erev Pesach. We spoke this out in the introduction. You have a person who his 7th day is the 13th. The 13th, Amachaya. He went to the mikvah. It's the night, Oir La'arba Asar. What he should have done is he should have brought his kapara korbanos during the day of the 14th. Then he can be part of a group of the Korban Pesach and Shalom Al Yisrael. He forgot to bring the kapara korbanos. They actually slaughtered the Pesach korban for him, or not, doesn't make a difference. The question is, what should he do? The problem is they already brought the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim. So says this Braisa that a Mechusar can put him on Erev Pesach, even though they already brought the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim, and he should have brought it before, but he didn't, he can bring his kapara korbanos after the Tamid Shel Bein Harbayim. So he's going to bring that, and this rabbinic tefillah, Shetoivel Sheinis, he can be included in a group of the Korban Pesach, and then of course, he can eat Pesach on the night of the 15th. That's already the next day. No one disagrees with that. However, there is a Rabbi Yishmael B'nai Shel Rabbi Yechim says, I'll tell you one better. You're speaking about a Mechusar Kippurim. A Mechusar Kippurim can offer his carbon after the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim throughout the whole year if he opted to bring a carbon that day, like he brought a shlamim, a donation shlamim. And again, and they didn't realize that they did not bring his kapara korbanos yet. that yes, that even though they bought the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim, what are you going to tell them? Well, only bring your kapara karbanis tomorrow, which would mean even though a shlamim could be eaten for 2 days, he'll still have some time to eat up a shlamim, but we're diminishing the time. Hashem gives him 2 days and 1 night. Here, because of the fact that they forgot to bring the kapara carbon, he's going to lose today. He's going to lose the night. So they bring the kapara carbon after the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim, and v'oichel kachum la'erev. End of Braisa. So we have a machloikas Tanoim. Everyone agrees Erev Pesach, another exception to bringing a carbon after the afternoon Tamid will be the Mechusar Kippurim. Rabbi Shmuel Benoi adds throughout the whole year as well, if another carbon was already brought on his behalf that he can eat of during the day before the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim. Now let's understand the underlines of this machloikas. Says the Gemara Bishlam l'Tanach Kamim. We understand why Pesach is an exception. Yava Yasei the Pesach, Sheyesh Boykares, V'yitchasei lahashlam she'en Boykares. We are basing ourselves based on the Chazal that we learned yesterday. That when it says in Parshat Tzav that Oleha Chelvei Hashlamim, that is to be interpreted not only Kipshutai, that on the Tamid Shel Shachar you bring the fats of the Shlamim. No, we learn from it also Oleha Hashlim Kol HaKorbanos Kulam. So really, when you bring the Tamid in the afternoon, nothing else should be brought. Nothing else. I know it's a lav. Shabbat Michlal Asay has the koyach of an Asay, but you have a positive biblical commandment not to bring anything after the afternoon Tamid. So hold on. So how are we allowing this Mechusar Kippurim to bring his kapara karbanos after the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim? Because since there's another klal, bringing a Pesach is a mitzvah asay. Not only is it a mitzvah asay, it's from the only 2 exceptions, as we have in the beginning of Krisus, of that if you violate a mitzvah asay, God forbid, you're going to get kares. So the weight of the asay of Pesach is greater than the weight of the asay of Oleh Hashlim Kol HaKorbanos Kulam. So this asay is doicha that asay. And in order for him to eat the carbon Pesach, you have to bring the Mechusar Kippurim Karbanis. You bring it. That we understand. And no one argues with that. But Rabbi Shmuel B'nai Shoreichem Embroika, that he says that this is true even throughout the entire year. So for example, they brought for him a carbon shlamim, and then they chapped oigavalt. The shlamim was brought before the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim. And they brought the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim. But now you want to bring, after the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim, you want to bring another carbon, the Mechusar Kippurim. How can you do that? My umay hayasei. Mahayasei. But just because he has to eat the shlamim, that's a positive commandment. All right? But if you don't eat it, by the way, if I bring a carbon shlamim and I have 2 days and 1 night and I don't eat any of it today, and I don't eat any of it tonight, I'm not going to get kares. I'll eat it tomorrow. So why will that trump? Why will that be doicha? How does that overpower the asay of hashlama? Oleh hashlim kol HaKorbanos kulam. So what's the logic behind Rabbi Shmuel Benoi? So Amar Ravina, answer number 1 in the name of Rabbi Chizda, that indeed we have to limit the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan and Broika, only regarding Chata Soif Haskinan. Chevra Kachin, what did we learn? And by the way, many Mechusar Kippurim are birds. 1 oila, 1 chatos. Now, I know that the oila has to be burnt on the Mizbeach. You guys remember? The chatas oif, number 1, the bird chatas, the chatas oif, the avoid is done lamata. I mean, the animal chatas is done above the chutasikra. The bird chatas is done under the chutasikra. What is the avoida? Only mitzui hadam. None of it is eaten by the Mizbeach. It's eaten by the kahanim. Gevaldik. So when the Torah says Oleh hashlim kol HaKorbanos kulam, that's an explanation of the words Oleha chelvei hashlamim, about burning. We're speaking about burning. The chatos oif is not burnt. You're not violating bringing a chatos after the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim, because the Mizbeach is not going to be burning it. Yes, the dam is going to be put on the walls of the Mizbeach. So what? It's not going against the pasuk in Tzav. Beautiful. So that's one answer. Next answer, Rav Papa says, no, afilo tema b'chatos behemo. You're not allowed to burn meat on the pyre after you burn the Tamid Shel Beinu Arbayim. You won't burn it. Who says you're going to burn it? Listen to this chap. You shech the animal, chatos. The dam is not an issue. You put the dam of a chatos on the 4 koronos, the 4 horns of the Mizbeach. If you're not going to burn it, we got ourselves a problem, because these emurim right? If you're not going to burn it today, I burn it tomorrow after the Talmud Shel Shachar. Upa, psolina. So there's a solution. Bring it up on the Mizbeach. Ma'aleh. Don't put it on the fire. Put it on the side. It's going to overnight on the top of the altar. Umalina b'rosh Mizbeach. Guys, these are the klalim we learn in Kachim. And there's a rule that anything that's on top of the Mizbeach will not become invalidated through psolina. Perfect. So you get all the words. You gave the person an atonement. He got the kapara because the dam was put on the Mizbeach. He can eat kachim. The meat, the emurim, the parts of the chatos that have to be burnt to God will be burnt tomorrow after the Talmud Shel Shachar. Not to violate the Oleh Hashlam Kol HaKarbanos Kulam. I normally psolina. No, you already put it on the Mizbeach. I frek Gemara. That is all nice when it comes to a chatos. I v'ha'ika asham. There is also by a mitzvah not only two karbanos that are in the kapara chatas and oila, which is normally a chatas and oila. By the mitzvah there's an asham. Now, by the way, the answer that he gave Rav Papa that works for the asham, but the first answer doesn't work with that. So bishlam el Rav Papa that says it's not a contradiction. You bring the kapara karbanos. This is all according to Rabbi Shmuel B'nai Shel Rabbi Yechon and Broika. So the person gets the atonement, but you don't burn the meat. You do the same thing with the asham. Hainu, the mal-in-law, you overnight it on top of the mizbeach. But according to Rab Chizda, now, chatos, you have an animal chatos, you have a bird chatos. There is no bird asham. Even by the poor mitzvah, he gets to bring birds for the chatos and for the oil, not for the asham. So according to Rab Chizda, ma'ika l'meimar. Answers the Gemara. No. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Just to clarify, according to Reb Chizda, if you were wealthy and you were not subject to bringing a bird, so then you lost out.
You lost out. Right? You lost out.
So it's only if the guy happened to be poor, then he's able to do this shtick and he could participate in the Pesach.
Very good. And now once you are limiting Rabbi Shmuel, you go further. So what about an asham? Well, Rabbi Shmuel only said his case if the asham was already brought. Because if the asham wasn't brought, according to the first Rab Chizda, Yataka can't do it. Because the Oleh Hashlim Kol HaKarbanos Kulam is just as important as this Jew eating a shlamim today. Says the Gemara, hold on. What about the oila? What about the oila? You see, so the oila, so there's two options. Either the oila was already brought, and we're going to see the big problem with that. Because remember the klal, chatos and oila, which one always has to come first? Maybe there'll be an exception, but there's a rule. The chatos has to come first. So if we're speaking about someone that didn't bring the chatos, is the chavada that they didn't bring the oila comes after the chatos. So there's an oila, and if you're going to say, well, the oila taka won't be brought at all. And it doesn't matter. He can eat a shlamim. He gets his kapara only by the chatos being offered, the bird chatos. That's not true. Vatanya, this shita, this Rabbi Shmuel B'nai Shel Rabbi Yechon ben Broika Omer, that kishem shechatosei va'ashomei ma'akvin oisoi, for him to be allowed to eat kachim, kach oilosoi ma'akvesoi. And if you're going to say, well, the same answer, just like the asham was brought, so the oila was brought, that can be. Because we're speaking about someone who some of his kapara was not brought. You're limiting it to the bird chatos. That means that we're speaking about a case that the chatos was not brought. The asham can be brought the first, fine. But chatos and oila, if the chatos wasn't brought, the oila for sure was not brought. We learned in a brayso, this is the pasuk in Vayikra referring to the chatos oila v'yored, which is an animal. But that's one of the cases where the Torah says oila v'yored, that if you're poorer, by the chatos oila v'yored, there was the three levels. Bring an animal chatos. If the person is an ani, they bring two birds, echol chatos ve'echol oila. And then if the person is, God forbid, impoverished, then they bring a flour offering. That's why it's called chatos oila v'yored. So when the Torah is speaking out the option of bringing two birds, so the Torah says explicitly, bring the chatos first. Oh, so ask Chazal, why did the Torah have to say bring the chatos first? Well, you're going to answer what? To tell you that the shetahei kodemus la'oila. We don't need that, asks the Braisa. Because it says, ve'es hasheni yasa oila kamishvat. The Torah could have said, V'hikrev eis asher lachatos, and then V'eis hasheni yasa oila. If the Torah is calling the oila the sheni, that is clearly indicating the chatos has to be the first. So why does the Torah have to write the word first? Ella, third line from the bottom, Zeh bona av l'chol chatois. Whenever there's a chatos in an oila, sheyu koidmois l'chol oilas abois simahem. Chatos oila, chatos has to come first. Right, as we have the Chazal say, right, that oila doirenhu, the oil is a gift, and you know when you bring a gift, only after you appease the praklit. And that's the base in the first section of the Geras HaTshuva, where the Alter Rebbe explains all this. In other words, first, the basic tshuva and the complete tshuva. And Bisman Abayis, right, the basic tshuva, as we are explaining, is done by bringing the carbon chatos. That's tantamount to today, making the hachlata, from now on, I will not sin. Because if from now on, I'm still going to sin, then the apology not only won't be accepted, it's going to instigate. You don't apologize to a person before you really verbalize that you won't repeat the offense. You won't become a repeat offender. What good is there to apologize when you know you're going to do it again? So first, the ikar tshuva, first chatos. Now that you're not going to repeat the sin, now you want to become beloved to the king the way you weren't before, as we're having to get us on tshuva. So the klal is that the oila comes second. So again, if you allow leaving the meat on the mizbeach, there's no kasha here. But according to the first answer, the first amayda, that we are limiting the whole Rabbi Shmuel only because it's a bird korban and the bird chatos, no meat is burnt. What happened to the oila? And furthermore, v'kaimelon, that this importance of chatos coming before oila is even if the chatos is a bird and the oila is an animal, and you would think an animal is more chashuv. Never. Chatos comes before the oilam. So on that, says the Gemara, there's one exception. There's one exception where the oila comes before the chatos. And where is that? By the Mitzvah. Amarava, guys, we had the sugya in Zavachim, we had this in Hoydius, it's great. That Shani oilas Mitzvah. Since the Rachmana Amar, turning to Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis, Ve'he'ela, this is a pasuk in Parshas Mitzvah, Ve'he'ela hakoyin es ha'oila, and the Torah could have said, Rashi says, Ve'es ha'oila ya'ale. The Torah doesn't say that. It says, Ve'he'ela hakoyin es ha'oila, and that's to tell you, She'he'ela kvar. In other words, the oila, the Torah is being marames, that by a Mitzvah, the oila can come before the chatos, and it makes a lot of sense also, because don't forget, by a Mitzvah, even though we know that, Mitzvah comes because a person is moitzi shemra, really Chazal speak about seven failings for which one can have tzoras manifesting on one's body. I get all that. But nevertheless, it's not like the normal chatos where I sinned, I ate chele, b'shoyig, I have to bring a carbon. It's part of the steps that you have to do to rectify the tzoras, to come into tahara. There, the seder can be reversed. You're not bringing it directly for the sin. You're bringing it as the seder of a kapara for the fact that you were a mitzvah. Be that as it may, both Amoraim stand, and the first Amoraim stands, and he limits Rabbi Shmuel b'noi Sholech v'Amoraika. What are you allowed to bring for the Mechusik Kippurim, Kol Hashana Kula, after the Talmud Shel Beinu Arbayim? Only the blood of the chatos oif. Now, asks the Gemara, Amalei Rab Shemen bar Abba to Rav Papa, Lidi Doch, right? You're saying, no, you're not going to limit Rabbi Shmuel. You can bring an animal carbon, and there's no big deal. All you need to do is don't burn it, bring the meat on the Mizbeach, and leave it there. So he says, the doctor, Amnat Malo Malin Beresh Mizbeach. Now, I don't understand, asks the Gemara, how can you allow such a thing to happen? Are we allowed to have something happen in the Beis HaMikdash, which probably will lead for a kohen accidentally to do something wrong? What is the kohen doing something wrong? As we'll see soon in this Amit, and it's good to chazer this. Very important, guys, when we are saying the whole time that the final avoid is the Talmud of the afternoon, that's the final carbon whose dam is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. If the Kohanim brought a carbon oil or carbon shlavim or carbon asham, any carbon, prior to the Talmud Shel Beinu Arbayim, bringing it meaning that they sprinkled the dam. the chelavim and the evarim is allowed to be burnt the whole night. It's after the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbaim that we don't care, because the avoid of the dam was done before the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbaim, which is the ikar. Which means that kohanim are busy every night burning the fats of many karbanis that were brought during the day. So what are you telling me? That you're going to have this chat? Now the problem here is that this chatos wasn't even sprinkled before the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbaim. That's the novelty, that we allowed the zrika to happen after the Talmud Shel Bein Ha'arbaim, but those fats cannot be burnt. Yeah, so you're going to have on top of the mizbech, you're going to have the emurim, the chilavim of many karbanis that the kohanim are going to be busying themselves burning the whole night on the pyre, and this fats cannot be burnt. Why do you think they won't accidentally burn it? They're going to end up burning it. It's too big of a risk. How do you allow something to be on the mizbeach while the kohanim are burning chilavim ve'evarim, and this may not be burnt? The Savrinan, they will think, the Gemara feels is the yoimahu, that the dam of this carbon was sprinkled during the day, like the dam of all the other karbanos whose chilavim are burnt the entire night, and accidentally v'asi lakturei. So for you, kohanim, answers the Gemara, Amarle, that's not a kasha. Kohanim, because of them being zrizim, we trust them. They're diligent. They're careful. Yes, no takala will come. They're going to have a special corner. They're going to mark it. A mistake will not be made. Weiter. Or Rav Nassan asks Rav Papa, hold on a second. We're speaking about a chatos, right? So again, we're speaking about you sprinkling the dam of the chatos on the four koronis of the mizbeach, bringing up the chalavim ve'avarim, but not burning it. I got myself another problem. What's my other problem? That since they did not burn the emurim, and they will not burn it until tomorrow after the morning tamid, so kohanim limatzi achli basar. Don't forget, by a chatos, even though it's kachik kachim, and the baalim don't eat meat of kachik kachim, but kohanim have to eat. Now, a kohen is not allowed to eat the parts that go to the kohanim prior to Hashem kaviyachol eating his part by burning the chalavim on the mizbeach. The Tanya, yochol yu kohanim l'shoyim b'chazeh v'shoik. Chazeh and shoik are two parts of a carbon shlamim, right? The breast and the right thigh that is given to a kohen from every shlamim. So you would think that kohanim can eat it before you burnt the emurim that have to be burnt on the mizbeach. Koidim haktaras emurim. For that, says the Braisa Talmud Leimin and Parshas Tzav, the hiktir hakoyin es achel of hamizbecha. First, the Torah speaks about the burning of those parts that have to be burnt on the pyre, on the altar, and then v'hoya hachaza li'ara novanov. Okay, so first of all, if you're telling me this chap, lina, you resolve by putting it on top of the altar, but don't burn it. If you won't burn it, then kohanim can't eat it. Now let's firois the kasha. The kama the kohanim lo yachli basar. Since the kohanim taka will not be able to eat the meat on that day, so ba'alam le'mischapre, so the owners will not get their atonement. As we learned in a Braisa of Vaiter, this is going back to Parshas Tetzava, that when it says va'achlu oisam asher kupar bohem, and they shall eat them, those who gain atonement through them. Really, we're not speaking about the same people. The carbon is being brought to bring an atonement for the owners. They eating, who eats kachim kachim? The kohanim. So it's not that the ones who are getting an atonement eat it. It's not that. What is the pasuk saying? The pasuk is saying, the kohanim are the ones who are eating. The owners get the kapara, but the pasuk is linking the atonement with the eating of the kohanim. That melamed shahakoyanim achlim u'ba'alim ischaprim. And in Chassidus we have so much about this, about that achilas hamizbeach is a lower level, imagine, than achilas kohanim. Do you imagine? You would think the kohanim eating later, it's like a schar. No. That's the whole idea of shirayim that we get from a tzaddik. That the eating of the mizbeach is the end of the avoid of birurim. Al pi Chassidus, al pi Kabbalah. Once you conclude the avoid of birurim, and therefore you already elevated that to a certain level in godliness, now you have to bring it up to a much higher level, not to affect the birur, but to affect the yichud. The avoid of yichudim is the avoid of tzaddikim, which is the avoid of kahanim. Bottom line is, l'choira, since you're telling me that the meat is not going to be burnt, which means the kahanim cannot eat the meat. If the kahanim cannot eat the meat, there's no kapara. What are we trying to accomplish? This Jew is a mechusar kippurim. B'chusik Kippur means that he has a carbon shlamim that was already brought before the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, but how can he eat the shlamim if he forgot to bring his kapara? So you're telling me you can bring it, and you're finding this way of bringing it, but he won't get his atonement. He will not get you accomplished nothing. So Amalei, here the response is that Kivin Deloy Afshed. Since in this scenario, because the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim was brought, and Oleh Hashlim Kol HaKorbanos Kulam, you may not burn this. So in such a case, Asoum, we consider this as if the Chelavim, the Emurim became Tamei, or as if the Chelavim, the Emurim got lost. And in a case where you don't have that which is going on the altar, Kohanim are allowed to eat that which is left for the Kohanim. The Tanya Yochel, you would think that if Nitnu Emurim, or Sha'avdu the Emurim, Lo Yu Kohanim Zakoyim B'chazei V'shoik, because normally the Seder is first the Mizbech, then the Kohanim. So there's an exception that if the Mizbech cannot get its share because it was lost or Tamei, Talmud Lamed, and that's a statement without any conditions. Mikol Makaim. So now Rav Papa, we're going to add that nuance that even if the Emarim are benimtza, but if halachically you cannot burn it, it's keilu, it's le benimtza for today. And therefore the Kohanim could eat it. And once the Kohanim eat it, then the owner gets his kapara and then he can have a shlamim. How great is that? And al pi Chasidus, it comes out that if there is a lack in the avodah of birurim, because there's tamei, because shenevdu, because of galus, then the kohanim can do their part. Okay, and now we're going to go through two contradictions, which are rules that we already mentioned, and it's very important to chazer these rules. So when we learned the sugya about, again, Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim is the final avodah, and on the pyre you can only burn fats of karbanos on top of the morning Talmud, but not on top of the afternoon Talmud. 1 second. Rav Kahana says it's not so simple. There's a contradiction. It says in Parshas Mishpatim that lo yolin chelev chagi ad boker, that the fats of my karbanos, God says, don't allow it to overnight it up until the morning, into the morning. In other words, that's the source, a pasuk in Mishpatim, that the chalavim, the fats of the karbanos, could be burned throughout the night. You only may not leave it noisar into the morning. You know, it's ad boikiru de loyolin, and if not, it's noisar. But hakol alayla kol loyolin, and as it said, that's so clear. But now the kasha is viksiv. What we learned yesterday, the pasuk in Sav, that v'hikted oleh chelvei hashlamim, and on that Chazal say it doesn't only refer to the carbon shlamim, but shlamim miloshen hashleim oleh hashlim kol karbonis kulam. In other words, clearly nothing may be burnt on the pyre after the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. The Talmud Shel Shachar, on that burn all the karbonis. So are you allowed to burn anything on the Mizbeach after the afternoon Talmud or not? A contradiction. So he himself answered, who Maisivla, he asked the question, and who Mefarikla, Kishan Toisru, like we just spoke out. It has to do with whether the Zrika was done before the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. If the Zrika was done before the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, then you can burn it the whole night. Our whole sugya was you didn't even do the Zrika before the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. Here is where we apply Oleh Hashlim Kol HaKarbanos Kulam. Right, another contradiction that was asked by another Amayda. Rami laid Rav Safra to Rav, or we have here on the side from the Mesoidas Hashaz that Rav Safra asked this to Rava. It says, and he's quoting a pasuk in Parshas Ki Sisa, that lo yolin la boiker zevach chag hapasach, that the carbon pesach should not remain into the morning, which implies that until when could you eat a carbon pesach? La boikeru de la yolin, but kol alayla yolin. What are we talking about? In other words, when you sprinkle the dam of the carbon pesach, which is brought on the 14th. 14th is not Shabbos, it's not Yom Tov, it's a weekday. It's like you're not allowed to do avodah, but it's a Yom Chayil. You sprinkle the dam then, and you can burn the fats of all of the Jewish people's carbon pesach the whole night. We got ourselves a problem. It says in Parshas Pinchas, Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi. The oil of Shabbos should be brought on Shabbos. What does that mean? It comes to teach you v'loy oilas choil b'Shabbos, that on Shabbos you cannot burn the oila that was brought during the day. And also v'loy oilas choil b'Yom Tov, which means, my friends, that even though we're saying that if the Zrikas Hadam happened before the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbayim, its fats could be burnt the whole night. Hold on. On every Erev Shabbos, the oila that was brought, the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbayim, that's brought, or Shel Shachar, even though the Zrikas Hadam happened Friday, those fats were burnt on Friday. Can burn on Shabbos a carbon that's connected to the day prior. Now, from the pasuk from Kisisa, regarding Zevach Chag HaPesach, it clearly indicates otherwise. So answers the Gemara, Amarle, first of all, that's a Alta Kashe, Kvaramya Nihile, this contradiction was brought out by Rab Abba Bar Chia. He asked that to Rab Abohu, and Rab Abba already gave him an answer, that the only time where we apply the pasuk in Parshas Kisisa, which is telling you that you can burn the chalavim of the Korbanos Pesach throughout the night of the 15th, that's only when Arba Asar itself was Shabbos. So the Korban Pesach, the Zrikas Hadam happened on Shabbos. The night is Yom Tov. Shabbos to Yom Tov, Yom Tov to Shabbos is okay. The Chelvei Shabbos could even be Yom Tov. That really limits the pasuk in Parshas Kisisa. So now we have another appreciation of how Kohanim was reasoned. It's not only that they needed to bring to Shech everyone's Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach before night. It's much more than that. Is that they didn't have the whole night to burn the chelav. Imagine that these animals were geshachten and they were put on the pyre. Unless Erev Pesach was on Shabbos. Then they had a little bit less pressure, because only then were they allowed to burn it the whole night. Let's just finish until the Gemara.
A regular shlamim or a regular carbon, where normally they would burn the imurim at night. You're saying on a Friday night they would not?
That's what we learned. Exactly. That's the oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi. Very good. Shabbos cannot be used to burn a carbon that came from the choil. Amalei mishum the chelvei Shabbos take. Chelvei Shabbos can be Kerevim b'Yom Tov. So you're taking a whole pasuk and you're limiting it to only this scenario. Anam neiku v'neimalei la'ikra b'arba'asar shechalias b'Shabbos u'dechsiv. So he said, yeah, sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes there's a pasuk. The pasuk is making a statement, and we really limit the pasuk. So Amalei shafkei likra. Don't let this pasuk alone. It's evident that this pasuk can only be referring to, as we said, can only be referring to when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. Only then does Hashem say that lo yolen laboiker zevach hagapasach. But during the night you can burn it. But if it's not Shabbos, then you're kidding. You have to burn the whole thing up before Shabbos. Guys, we have time. Let's start the new Mishnah. Guys, just saying the words. The first Mishnah of Zavachim begins that kol hazvachim shenizbuchu sheloi lishman kshedim. So if I have a carbon shlamim, and during any one of the four steps of shchita, kabbalah, hilacha, zrika, same thing by a mincha. By the four steps by the mincha is kemitza, nesina bekeli, that's the second keli, hilacha, and haktada. If during any one of these four steps, the kohen or the owners have a machsheves shaloi lishma, which means this is a shlamim, but they're thinking this is an oila. This is an oila, they're thinking this is an asham. They're doing it l'shem, another type of carbon. So the rule is, says the Mishnah, kshedim, you keep on doing the avodah. You did not invalidate the carbon. It doesn't count for the obligation of the owner. However, chutz min ha-pesach min ha-chatos. Pesach and chatos is so delicate that if you have a thought shaloi l'shma, it's invalid. You stop. So if during the shechita he had in mind he's doing this l'shem chatos, that's it. Now, what do you do with the animal? So we learned that you had an animal that has to be eaten in the azara. There were pyres. There were fireplaces in the azara where you burnt Solei HaMikdashim. Karbonis that could be eaten in Yerushalayim, right? There were pyres on Harabayas where they used the Atzei Hamaracha, or anywhere in Yerushalayim where you had to burn it there. But that's it, you stop the avodah. So now says the Mishnah, HaPesach sheshachatu shaloi lishmai, L'mashal. They thought that this is a shlamim, and they had in mind shlamim. Then which the machshava was during shchita, or says the Mishnah, this machshava was during any one of the other three steps, which is Kabbalah, the Kibel, or the Halach. Guys, remember Zvachim, the Chiddush? Sometimes Halach is not essential, because if the shchita was done mamish on the side of the Mizbeach, you don't need to do Halacha. Nevertheless, if Halacha is being done, then it's important enough for it to invalidate the korban if there was a machshava during the Halacha, or Vizarku Shaloi L'Shmai. Now another nuance. What happens if there was a double machshava? Positive, negative, or negative, positive? Oy L'Shmai u Shaloi L'Shmai. First the positive and then the negative. Oy Shaloi L'Shmai u L'Shmai. Now, let me ask you a question on this line. When did the person have dual intentions, good and bad? Was it during two different steps? Is that the meaning of the Mishnah? During the Shechita, he had Machshavas L'Shem Pesach, and then during the Kabbalah, it was Shaloi L'Shmai, or vice versa. During the Shechita, he had a Kavanah Shaloi L'Shmai, and then during the Kabbalah, he had a Machshavas L'Shma. Or is the dual Machshava during one of the four Avodas? Even if the dual Machshava was during one of the avodas, it's also going to invalidate the korban. That's going to be the first inquiry in the Gemara that we'll pick up tomorrow. But then to clarify this line in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah speaks out, no matter what, Pasol, this is the one of the two exceptions that we have in the first Mishnah in Zvachim. It's not Kshedim Elo Shaloi Alu L'Ba'alam. No, the korban becomes invalidated. Now, Ketzad L'Shmoi Ushaloi L'Shmoi, Kaiches the Mishnah, L'Shmoi means L'Shem Pesach, not l'shem yichud kudsha b'richu. Just to know the kavana and the l'shma means different things in a different context. Here we're speaking about, did you intend for this korban? And the shaloi l'shma was you're bringing the pesach l'shem shlamim. And the same thing in reverse. If first you had a machshava shaloi l'shma and then l'shma, so the shaloi l'shma is l'shem shlamim, and then the machshavas l'shma is l'shem pesach. And as we spoke out, we're going to continue tomorrow, God willing, that what we have to clarify is, during one avodah, during two avodas. That brings us back to the machlokes that we had of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, twice lashon nishon. We just had this, or af bigmar dvarav shel adam nispas. Because if you say twice lashon nishon and you have two intentions during one step, and the first one was good, then you're good, because we don't care about the second one. That's, in other words, the boy of understanding the Mishnah really has to do is who's the author of the Mishnah. Is it following the Shita twice Lashon Nishain? But if you follow Rabbi Yossi, Af B'Gemar Dvarav Shel Adam Nispas, then the two machshavas can even be in the same avodah. It will also invalidate it. God willing, to be continued. This is good. We're back to Kachim.
How does somebody make a mistake of an intention when they're supposed to do it for a certain sacrifice?
Doctor, ask better. We just learned on this Amid that Kohanim are Zerizim. Think about it. That when you give them something that an average person will mess up, the Kohanim were so careful. And here we're speaking about Kohanim that are messing up. So really this should happen. I mean, first of all, accidents could happen. The question is how often. It can also be speaking about someone who did it on purpose. Now, how would you know? There's a lot of topics here. Do they have to pay? If a coin messes up, does he have to pay? So that's a financial issue. When it comes to finances, the rule normally is that when I do a discernible damage, I have to pay in a human court, in a beis din. If let's say you have produce and I made it impure, and you're a kohen, so I ruined it, but you can't discern it. So then the rule normally is that if I want to make good with God, I have to pay you, but not by a human court. But you're right. Another question here is, how do you know what the kohen had in mind? Do we trust him when he says I had something wrong in mind? There's a lot of issues. We have that in Zvachim. According to most opinions, if you remember, Rashi, Tosfos, that even though the Chazal used the words machshava, it only has a power to invalidate if he verbalized it, if you remember that. Another question is it that he has to have a machshavas l'shma, or is it that a negative intention ruins it? We learned in Zvachim, you don't have to have any machshava. We tell Kohanim, bring it l'shem, whoever it is, for whatever it has to be for. We accept that you don't have to have a positive intent, is that we don't allow a negative intent. It's like when we daven, we have a hayom yom, that when a person doesn't know all of the kavanas of the Arizal, he can say, God, take my prayers and put in it all of the good Kabbalistic kavanas, and that's good. But if you have a wrong kavana, then you messed up your prayer. A lot more chavra. We got to run to shul. Rosh Chodesh, Gavaldik tomorrow.